Speaking of low quality movies.
Hey. Hey, it's by the guy that did the first, well, not the first one, the second one. The one that I love. Anyways, Kickboxer 4, The Aggressor from 1994. David Sloan is back again. This time he's been framed and sent to prison by Tong Po, who has also kidnapped Sloan's wife. Tong Po's he's since become a big drug lord in Mexico that the feds cannot get close to, and so the DEA offers Sloan a pardon from prison to compete in an annual fighting tournament that is held by Tong Po in an effort to eliminate him. So, I guess I should quickly say for anyone who hasn't watched any of our previous Kickboxer reviews, number 2 is my favorite movie. Well, my favorite from the series, my second all-time favorite film. So I give that a 10 out of 10. First movie I really enjoy, I gave that a 9 out of 10. And the third one I gave an 8 out of 10, just because mainly because it had David Sloan and Xian, two staple characters from the series. So for this one, we're missing Xian, which is a bit of a shame. We've still got Sasha Mitchell again as David Sloan, which is good to see. Even though we don't have Xian, we have Tong Po back, but unfortunately not by the same actor, which is evident by some terrible close-up shots. If anyone's looking even remotely close enough, you can see that this person has some epic makeup going on around their eyes, to the point where it almost looks like they're wearing a mask. I mean, this movie, there's some positives. I mean, if you compare it to the previous movie, the third one, which I know in some people's eyes is in most people's eyes, it's definitely the weaker of the first 3 movies. And I guess the big thing about that third movie is that it doesn't really have as much fighting, or at least in terms of just being a martial arts movie. It's transitioned more to being an action movie with gun violence and things of that nature, and ultimately a bad guy who's not even a martial artist. Whereas this one returns more to the martial arts side of things. We've got the fighting tournament, so it's good to see some actual fighting in the movie. But it's also taken a bit of a hit in terms of the quality. I mean, there's a lot of mediocre acting, I guess. The story is a bit generic, or like it's just kind of been, we'll just write whatever and throw these characters in and let them deal with it. Yeah, it's probably the weakest of the first 4, but I still kind of enjoy it enough just because of some of the characters that I'm familiar with David Sloan, Tong Po, and things like that.
I guess my history, as many of you may know, I've never even seen any kickboxing movie before we started doing these shows. And I've enjoyed the first 3. I think the lowest I gave was, I think I gave the third one a 7, maybe it was a 6, but I think it was a 7.
It's a 7, yeah.
Yeah. So I've enjoyed the series thus far. This movie just felt rushed for one, which is its biggest problem. Its biggest problem is it felt somewhat lifeless to me. Like, the character of Sloan here, he almost didn't have a character. Now, some people might say, and I can get it, that, after being in prison, was it 2 years? It was for some time period that maybe sort of sucked some of the life out of him, which I get. It would suck to be framed and sent to prison. But then the whole thing with his wife being a captive of Paul, like, we never knew the wife. She never appeared before, so it's just some random woman who we, the audience, have literally no emotional connection to. And to be honest, it didn't seem like Sloan did either. Like, I did get any soul from this movie. It was just characters going through the motions. I mean, the fights were fine, even though the final fight was, in my opinion, pretty weak. But it just, what I really think would have benefited, and I know these are, by this point, these are cheaply made movies. If they had made maybe 2 of these, like part 1, introducing the wife, and then at the end of part 1, him being framed, and then this movie, I think it might have gone over a bit better. It gave us more more look into these characters, because by the end of the movie, I don't know a thing about the wife, aside from the fact that she can kick ass, apparently, I guess, even though she was captured for 2 years. It just, I have a hard time feeling for any of these characters, and I just don't think the movie did a good job of, I guess, showcasing the lovability that we saw from the first few movies.
Yeah. Well, just touching on something I was talking about earlier with Tong Po being played by a different actor. They bring in this other guy, who I've seen in other movies. He was, I think, it was in Death Warrant with Van Damme. Anyways, a lot of people give Tong Po, or at least the look of him in this movie, a lot of grief. I don't think he actually looks all that bad, at least in some shots. It's only the really close-up shots, especially the shots where they're looking from, like, looking upwards towards him. You can actually see, like, what the hell's going on with this guy's eyes. I mean, it really does look like he's wearing a mask. But if you took away those and you look at some of the scenes where he's shot from a bit further away, I think he actually looks pretty good. There is a part towards in the end fight where people are saying you can see his hair coming loose, which I don't know, it looks pretty cheap anyways. But yeah, that final fight is very disappointing as well, especially when you consider the first 2 movies that you see Tong Po in. He's just so completely different in terms of his mentality in this movie. Like, the first 2 movies, he wouldn't run away from someone. Like, he'd just stand there and let you punch him. I mean, in this movie, it almost feels like he's a bit of a chicken shit. So it's kind of disappointing that, to an extent, what they did to his character by the end of the movie.
Yeah, I think the thing is, I guess the thing for me, if you look at the first few movies, I think they're pretty decent. And they had a chance to come back with this 4th movie. They had a chance to sort of, like, I guess, wrap it up and give, like, a big final, showdown between these two. I mean, like the beginning of this movie shows. Poe's, he cast the death of, like, 2 of his brothers. So, I mean, honestly, do we see? I don't know. I just don't see any emotion from Sloan. Like, I just didn't see any of it. So they had the potential to, like, have a pretty epic showdown, even with a lower budget. I think they probably could have done it if they had a better script. But it just came across as such a generic, like, hey, you have to fight these people, and then you can move up and fight these people, and hey, this final fight. It's just disappointing, because they had such a potential to do so much better. And I have no idea what the other movies in the Kickboxer series. I'm not sure if they bring Paul back in some form, but they could have wrapped it up with this movie and maybe make a movie on par with the 3rd one. But the writing here was just not great.
Yeah. Well, as far as I'm aware, the movie, before it had even been filmed, had already made something like $6 million. So they got all these deals, I guess, to make and release this movie. For a low budget movie from the 90s, I mean, how often does a movie make that kind of money before it even gets made? But anyways, I did also pick up on the fact, and you can kind of see this in the movie, that as they were filming the movie, I've heard that one of the, and this is actually from the director himself, he said, like, there was a faulty plug on one of the cameras that resulted in some of the footage being kind of struck by light. And you can kind of see it in certain shots of the movie where it just feels like there's a little too much exposure or something. And apparently, so a lot of footage, well, I don't know how much footage, or if it would have made a difference, but they did scrap a bunch of footage because of it. They just felt it couldn't be used because of the damaged plug or whatever it was on the camera that caused it. So, it would have been interesting to know if there was any other things they shot that may have made it different or better. I don't know, but just an interesting fact that I thought I would bring up.
I will say, I do wish, because you mentioned that what the guy's name isn't in this movie, the sidekick from the first three. They could have at least mentioned him in some way, like say, oh, he went back to, his home, just something. But I mean, I watched this yesterday, maybe it was 2 days ago. I don't think he was mentioned whatsoever.
No.
And it was just, I mean, some movies, I like, let's, Portuguese 2, the sister from the first movie wasn't there, but they at least mentioned her in that movie saying, oh, she's off at school. It might come across as cheap, but at least they gave some type of explanation. Here, they give us nothing, and it's just disappointing. Like, it's not like it's life-changing. Honestly, if he was here, I don't think the movie would have been that much better. But, it would have been something. And also on the beginning of this movie, when he's writing the letter to his wife, I like how he's going over the events of the first few movies that I'm sure his wife already knows. And it's obviously just to fill in the audience with, just some backstory. So that was,
I mean, I don't know to what extent she actually does know.
Well, that's because they never told us anything about her.
Yeah.
I mean, so I don't know if that's not necessarily something to give the movie credit for.
I guess one great thing about that opening scene, at least for me, because I'm such a fan of the second movie, is that it feels like just for a split second in that flashback, they use some unused footage from Kickboxer 2. It's like the closest thing to a deleted scene that I can come to. I mean, there's a scene where they show, I guess after Tong Po losing his first match, like from the first movie, where he's getting spat on, and there's a shot just before he gets spat on, like a very distant shot where he's kneeling down, he's wearing a suit. You can't tell because it's so far away, but if you look closely in HD, you can kind of see he's wearing a white shirt with a tie. And for anyone who kind of remembers part 2, that's the clothes he was wearing when he killed Van Damme's character.
Huh.
So that would have been filmed, I'm assuming, for part 2. And they cut out the actual fight scene with Kurt Sloan, who was Van Damme's character in part 2, but I've seen on multiple VHS cases, I've actually got multiple VHS releases of part 2 in my closet from all over the world, and some of them actually mention that Tong Po was punished by whoever his higher-ups are for doing that, because as we know in part 2, they wanted to do another fight to regain their honor, blah 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 blah. And so apparently they punish him, they put him through all this training where he gets all these scars, or these extra scars from all this punishment, and I guess that was a part of it, where he's kneeling down there receiving whatever punishment that was. So yeah, that was like the closest thing to a deleted scene that I could come to from the second movie, because I can't see anything, there's nothing else from that movie that I can come across, and I wish I could.
Well, now I guess my last question is, how do you feel about the character of Michelle or Mouse?
Well, yeah, I don't believe for a second that she would have won any of those fights that she did in the tournament. I mean, she is an actual real martial artist, that actress, but it just did seem a little ridiculous just because she's so small, and even though I'm sure she's a decent martial artist in her own right, she's competing against supposedly some of the best in the world, and I just don't... I mean, she looks like just more of a street punk, so I just don't see her winning any of those.
Actually, now you mention it, it's funny because when they first got to like the ranch, the main area, when they were going to like the first fights in the bullpen type place, like watching those fights, I didn't get from them like, hey, they're the best of the world. They just looked like pretty much the same quality of fights that they were having, that the bikers were having back in California. Like I didn't see high quality fighting there. Like, for the most part, it was just the same stuff as anything else. It was a little better during, I guess, the main tournament, but it just felt somewhat weak. Like, I mean, like, compare some of those fighters to the fighters from the first few movies. Like, there's no comparison.
Yeah. The bar fight that they have earlier in the movie is pretty entertaining, I thought.
That actually might be one of the best fights in the movie, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few funny things happening there. Like, I guess the main funny thing happening is that one guy who kept getting knocked into the glass, and you're just kind of waiting to see when is he actually going to get smashed through the glass, because he keeps getting knocked into it, but it just doesn't break. And then eventually it happens. And then also, in addition, there is a ridiculous moment where David, he gets some pool cues and like clamps some guy's balls, I guess, even though he's wearing jeans.
I mean, regardless, I say it looked painful.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a little bit of an entertaining fight, especially that one. I guess one other thing that I just wanted to quickly mention, I guess for horror fans out there, especially Friday the 13th fans, is that the beloved Tom Matthews, who plays Tommy Jarvis in Part 6, he's actually Tong Po's like servant or sidekick or whatever in this, so, you know, that might do something for someone out there.
You know, I'll be honest, I had no idea until you just said that.
Anyways, out of the first 4 movies, it probably is the weakest one, especially in terms of just quality filmmaking, I guess. I like that Tong Po's back, don't so much like that it was a different actor, and sometimes those close-up shots are just terrible. And we also miss Zian in the movie, which is a bit of a negative. I like that it's returned to more of a fighting movie than just an all-round action movie like the third, but it is lacking some emotion, and it just feels a bit off. But because it's still got David Sloan in it, it's got Tong Po in it to some extent, that's enough for me to at least be entertained enough, or at least glued to the screen. So I'll give it a 7 out of 10, and I know the movie in most people's eyes is not nearly worth that rating, but being a huge fan of the series, you know, that's good for me.
So I've seen quite a few, well, I guess quite a few might be a stretch, but I've seen a handful of like low quality action movies from the 90s. You know, just straight to VHS type stuff. And they can be entertaining, but they're not necessarily great or even good movies. And this movie felt just like one of those. It just, like, I guess it's okay to an extent, but especially given what they could have done with, in my opinion, about the script. Like, there's so much they could have done. I just think it came across as disappointing. And I definitely think the third movie, despite it sort of changing the style up, I think it was a much better movie. So I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 10. And my main issue is there's not much life in this movie, and it's just not nearly as entertaining as the first 3. So this is the first Kickboxer movie I officially didn't enjoy all that much.
Yeah. Just one other thing that I've quickly thought of mentioning, it's just kind of funny. Some of the sound effects for like the kicks and punches is just embellished so much, like the whooshing noises at the start. It's just like I don't think I've ever seen anyone in real life throw a kick that made a whooshing noise, but
well, you're still young.